So when we look at the Garden of Love, what we can be doing is be considering how the pastoral, another poem of how the pastoral is presented in the Songs of Experience. The very title, the Garden of Love, is largely seen as being symbolically linked to the Garden of Eden and the duality that represents. That being that the paradise was lost to mankind due to Eve succumbing to the temptation. And we can see this paradise at the end of the first stanza, where Blake writes, "Where I used to play on the green." Therefore what we have is an adult's viewpoint, a desired return to a place of his youth, the green, symbolic of the pastoral, idealised world of innocence and childhood, being removed by that chapel that's been built. So the green is tainted by the building of this chapel. The second line, and saw what I had never seen, is an interesting line. It's not suggesting that Blake had not seen the chapel being built, but perhaps that gradual encroachment of society that creeps up on us, and we're not really aware of its effects until it has truly taken a hold over us. Some critics have suggested, however, that it represents maybe a state of mind, a depression of how the world has been taken over by repressive forces. When we get to the second stanza, we see that the chapel's doors are shut, and "thou shalt not" is written over the door. Therefore the emphasis is on the chapel being inaccessible and focusing on that idea of control, taken from the words from the Ten Commandments, "thou shalt not." Okay, what you cannot do. And the emphasis therefore is on the chapel being inaccessible and focusing on the idea of control. And this forbidding metaphor typifies Blake's view of organised religion as an institution of control. So our narrator turns away from the church in this final stanza and sees that the green has now changed. It has become a place of death, shown not only by the graves and the tombstones, but the black gowns of the priests, suggesting darkness, a colour much more associated with despair than hope. And they are walking in rounds. Around suggests crudely that they are going round in circle. So perhaps presenting the idea that there is no progression, that this religion is not progressive, it's something that restrains and holds us back. And that awful last line, "and binding with briars my joys and desires." The repetition of the plosive "be" is kind of angrily emphasising that the narrator's freedom and happiness is removed, okay, and that nature actually now is binding him. Therefore the innocence of the pastoral scene has been replaced by imagery of death, metaphorically representing the chapel suppression of what the green stands for, which is freedom, happiness, joy and youth. Note how this is supported by the form and the metre. There is a regular rhyme and trimeter until this final stanza, where the hope is lost. And what critics have said is where the trimeter represents the innocent youth, the shift to a more traditional tetrameter within these final two lines, coupled with the loss of the rhyme scheme within this final stanza, shows the removal of joy. So the protest against the restrictive nature of organised religion is quite obvious. Yet what is Blake really illustrating here? I mean, we can use this as a poem to discuss Blake's views on religion, but I think there's kind of a deeper idea that we need to understand here. Some have suggested that Blake is showing a persistent transition from the freedom of childhood to the restrictive world of the adult. And because we allow this to happen, the joy of the sweet flowers, as we can see at the end of this second stanzas, becomes the briars that metaphorically causes pain and restrict freedom. So is Blake lamenting the fact that experience and pain is inevitable? Contextually, if we remember that we say that the Echoing Green was written at the beginning of the French Revolution, this poem was written after the horrors of the Reign of Terror, where the ideals of the revolution had been perverted. And if you've never heard of the Terror, or you've never heard of the Reign of Terror, Google it. It was a particularly horrific period of French history, and kind of tainted the revolution. So some people read this poem and the poems of experience as a response simply to the reality